Oh, yeah. Or was somebody wanting to see? Or, oh, you can't see? I didn't know you wanted to. Is this different than it was before? Is this different than it was last week? Is that all right? Thanks. What a difference a week makes. I'd like to thank everybody who is involved in this meeting in any way for making adjustments on my behalf. I know the congregation here has planned this meeting for years. The elders very carefully constructed a balanced schedule, and I apologize for the shambles that I've made of it. I apologize to the other teachers of the classes for causing you to have to do things when you might not have been ready yet to do them. And I apologize to you, the class in general, for the inconvenience that I have caused you. My mother would join me in being mortified about all of this. I have to say that though my family may be small, we have a proclivity for messing up 2-week meetings that's absolutely unparalleled. But I do thank you all for your abounding graciousness toward me in my situation. It always seems that no matter what we throw at you, you come through. And I hope that now we can go 5 days in a row without further complications caused by me or mine. Mark said you're going to let me go. I didn't know what he meant by that, but I know on most jobs when they let you go, time to leave. So any further information you can give me about that, I would appreciate. Last Monday, I was handed one of the question cards that says need an outline. And I should let you know that we do hope to make available to you the stuff that's on these slides, if you would consider that an outline. The slides aren't exactly finished yet, but when those become available, we'll try to make those available to you in a way similar to some of the things that were passed out last Sunday or Monday when I was here. What I'm saying here is that if you're wanting an outline and you want the material from this class, there's no need for you to try to copy down the things that are on the slides. Some of them go by fast, and there's no reason for you to try to copy it down because it should be available to you at some point. Now, we were in the process of attempting to introduce a survey of the book of Revelation. We were talking very briefly about chapters 2 and 3, the letters to the 7 churches. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. I think when that statement is made, hear the things that are said to the churches, he's not just talking about these 7 churches of Asia, but he's talking to all churches, including your congregation and mine. Hear what the Spirit says to the churches. And as I said previously, I think in this meeting, unless reason arises, I don't plan to spend any time on these letters simply because of time. Chapters 4 and 5 present the Almighty on His throne, the 24 elders, the 4 living creatures, the 7-sealed scroll, and the Lamb as it had been slain. Isaiah and Ezekiel had already seen the heavenly scene hundreds of years before, and now John sees it again through a door opened in heaven. John was in the Spirit in a supernaturally gifted state. He was conscious of being directed by the Holy Spirit. The living creatures are the cherubim that Ezekiel saw by the river Kibar, and at least seem to roughly equate to the seraphim that Isaiah saw. They are a counterpart to the entire roster of animal and human creation. They are angelic representations of the multiplicity of created things. The 24 elders are another level of angelic being. They are a heavenly senate who do the bidding of their Creator. And they seem to be a standard element in the heavenly court. The interpretation of the 24 elders are the 12 apostles and the 12 tribes is attractive, but is dependent especially on the text of the King James Bible, which in this case does not bear up well under scrutiny. Even in the King James, the elders are distinguished from the redeemed in chapter 14, verse 3, and chapter 19, verse 4. But in the text as accepted by the more modern translators, the elders are even more clearly differentiated from the redeemed. Chapter 5, verse 10 says that the elders refer to the saints in the third person as they and them. They say, you have made them, the redeemed, to be a kingdom of priests, and they shall reign on the earth. The textual authority for us in chapter 5, verse 10, is just too weak to sustain it. 2 13th century manuscripts and 1 16th century edition of the Latin Vulgate. That's just too little too late. In 14:3, the 144,000, the first fruits to God and to the Lamb, sing a new song before the elders. They are distinguished from the elders. The number 24 does not appear elsewhere in Scripture as a symbol. The 24 elders are best understood as angelic beings who sit as subordinate elders, crowned, with Stephanos crowns, in the court of heaven. Now, I can see that they may be a heavenly equivalent of what on earth became or came to be the 12 tribes and the 12 apostles. But if so, that was a case of what is done on earth mirroring what already existed in heaven. The 24-member court also has earthly parallels in the small Sanhedrin of ancient Judaism and in the Qumran sect of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Maybe the 24 courses of priests in David's day were one of the patterns of things in the heavens of which the Hebrew writer wrote in Hebrews 9:23. So both the cherubim and the 24 elders are angelic beings, the cherubim representing creation and the 24 elders representing the people of God, but distinct from the people of God. I should point out also, because if I don't do it here, we'll have to do it as soon as we hit chapter 6 anyway, that the diadem crown did not come into prominence in the Roman Empire until Diocletian in the late 3rd century A.D. The laurel wreath Stephanos crown, though worn by victors of athletic and military contests, was the standard crown of the Roman rulers in the 1st century. It was worn by the kings of Macedonia and Greece. The seven-sealed scroll introduces the predictive part of the book, and John was so involved in the vision that he wept much because at first nobody was found who could open the scroll. Christ is called the Lamb 29 times in the book of Revelation. This is a great point of emphasis in the book. The Lamb was the central sacrificial victim in the Old Testament system, signifying innocence and purity and gentleness, but most of all, stressing the Lord's sacrifice. It's a lamb as it had been slain. Had not the lamb prevailed to open the seals, then the book of Revelation could have ended at chapter 5, verse 4, or wouldn't have existed at all. Now, scrolls were made of pages or leaves of papyrus or thin leather, sewn together at the left and right margins, so that as the document was read, the pages could be unrolled from one side and rolled up on the other. In the 1st century, documents were sealed by tying with string and sealing with a lump of clay, the clay which would be impressed with the signet ring of the sender. The seal was comparable to the wax seals commonly used for letters and official documents in the 19th century in Western civilization. Sealing wax is pretty much gone now as a way of sealing things. I remember back in the 60s, the Rolling Stones had a song called 19th Nervous Breakdown. Anybody else remember that song? You do. One of the lines in that song said that your father's still perfecting ways of making sealing wax, and it was to indicate somebody who was out of touch or behind the times. So here we are 50 years beyond that now, and there's nobody using sealing wax at all anymore. The sealing of the scroll symbolizes the hidden or inaccessible nature of its predictions. Daniel was told to seal a scroll until the time of the end. Daniel 12, verse 4, Daniel 8:26. The unsealing of the scroll in Revelation may be a conscious allusion to that, the reversing of the sealing that Daniel had done. As the Lamb breaks each seal, a part of the scroll can be unrolled and the corresponding action is revealed. The seals, the trumpets, and the bowls are the core of the book, at least as I'm viewing it. Each one of these series has its own conceptual unity. There seems in this to be a 4-2-1 pattern to each series of 7, in which the first 4 events predicted in the series are introduced just briefly, and the next 2 with a greater fullness, and finally the 7th seal and the 7th trumpet each introduce the next series, and the 7th bowl leads to the culminating events in the concluding chapters of the book of Revelation. So I call these 3 series the core of the book because they determine the main sequence of events and their chronological order within the book. Another symbolic device which determines how the book should be understood is the little scroll, which John eats in the 10th chapter. I think the prophecies that immediately follow that should be understood as the message of that little scroll. This is analogous to Ezekiel chapter 2, verse 9 through chapter 3, verse 9. The Lord handed Ezekiel a scroll, and he saw that on both sides of it were written lamentations and mourning and woe. The scroll contained the Word of God, which Ezekiel was to eat and then to preach. But it was not just any Word of God, and it was not the whole Word of God. It contained a specific message assigned to Ezekiel, the message of judgment against the covenant nation. The message given to Ezekiel then follows in the next few chapters. So in Revelation, the little scroll is not the Word of God as a whole, in my view, but a specific message, the content of which is found in chapters 11 through 14. Why is the scroll described as little? Probably in contrast with the seven-sealed scroll. In that case, we would expect this message to be a shorter message than that of the seven-sealed scroll. The natural place for the end of the little scroll, based on the internal evidence of the text, seems to be at the end of chapter 14 with the prolected vintage harvest that's mentioned there. We might ask, how does the little scroll message relate to the message of the larger scroll? Well, if the larger scroll contains the things that occur in the times future to John, chapter 4, verse 1, then the little scroll must be a part of the larger scroll. This seems implied by the way it's introduced within the dramatic scenery of chapter 10. It seems that the reason for the separation of the little scroll from the larger scroll is that the little scroll breaks with the chronological sequence of the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls, but it still is describing events that are future to John. Remember that the seven-sealed scroll in the hand of the Father was written on both sides, chapter 5, verse 1. Now, scrolls did not normally have writing on both sides. The exception was made when there was an excess of information, when you couldn't get it all on one side. Some have suggested that the supplementary material found in chapters 12 through 14 is what was written on the back side of the scroll, opposite to the place on the front side where the events from the same chronological time period were written. I think Eliot was the first one who came up with that, as far as I know. And the idea is as ingenious as it is fanciful. It's possible and sounds plausible, but it's not supported by any indication in the text. So I can't vouch for it. Without any precedent in ancient times to condition the original readers to see that device that way, then it seems sort of unlikely. Writing on the back of the scroll usually just meant that the message was unusually long or important. And I think we're ready to go on to chapter 6. And this may be a moment that some of you have been dreading, feeling like, oh, here we go into the history. But you ought to be a little interested in history. You're making it right now. Time is all of one piece. Will Durant said that the present is the past rolled up for action. The past is the present unrolled for our understanding. Somebody else said that those who can't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And Titus Livy said that the study of history is the best medicine for a sick mind. Do we realize what God did with the empires of the world? The Babylonian Empire caused the spread of the Jews to other countries by force. Synagogues were begun, and the knowledge of God in this way was spread by force in the world. The Medo-Persian Empire restored the worship to the Promised Land. They sponsored the building of the Second Temple. The Greeks came along and gave us a precise common language, a lingua franca for the Bible for the New Testament to be written in. And the Romans gave us the peace of Rome, the Pax Romana, and the roads, and so many other things that were helpful in the first century beginning of the church. We learn by connecting what we don't know with what we do know. In John's day, where are we in the Roman Empire? Everybody knows about Julius Caesar, who died in 44 BC. Along came Caesar Augustus after him. Caesar Augustus was the one who occupied the throne in Rome the night the baby was born and wrapped in swaddling clothes and laid in a manger. Then Tiberius, that Doug was talking about the last time that I was here a week ago. After him, Caligula, and then Claudius, and Nero, who was a persecutor of the church, probably started the great fire of Rome that burnt down the things that were on 5 of the 7 hills of the city of Rome from 54 to 68. Then real quickly, Galba, Ortha, and Vitellius in just a year and a half there. And finally, the Flavian family, Vespasian and his son Titus, and his brother, Titus's brother Domitian, from 81 to 96. And as we said last Monday, Domitian was the one who exiled John, perhaps after boiling him in oil. Unable to kill him in that way, he exiled him to the little island of Patmos out in the Aegean Sea. Patmos was 8 miles long, 5 miles wide, had its coastline very deeply indented, so that it was really a rather small island. Patmos Harbor was 40 miles from the Asian mainland. Patmos Harbor was 65 miles from the city of Ephesus, where John had been living. John saw a door opened in heaven, chapter 4, verse 1. He saw the throne scene seen by other prophets before him, Ezekiel and Isaiah. He'd been promised that he would be shown things which must shortly come to pass. He'd been told that the time is at hand. God couldn't wait any longer to give this prophecy if it was going to be prophecy. At the end of the book, in chapter 22, verse 10, the statement was made, "Don't seal up the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand for it to begin to be fulfilled." Don't put it in a time capsule. So Daniel was told to seal a vision, but John was not told to do that. For John, it was as if this was being enacted right in front of him. He was involved in the action. A week ago I mentioned a theater in the round. I wouldn't mention it again, but it's been a week and you've had a lot else run through your mind. I think of what John was experiencing as being like a theater in the round that you would see at Worlds of Fun, or maybe at Branson, definitely at Disney World or Disneyland. I've been in several of them, and I think most of you have been in at least one of them. You walk into a large circular room, and there are screens ahead of you, screens beside you, and screens beside you, behind you, just all around you. And they display moving images that have been shot simultaneously by cameras facing in every direction. So even though you're standing there stationary, you feel like you're a part of the action. There are rails for you to hold on to for that reason. One minute you'll be on the top of a fire truck speeding through the streets of New York City, and you'll see this scene all around you just as you would see it in real life if you were there. You'll see what you're moving toward in the front. You'll see what is receding in the back, and everything that's going by on the side. You just hold on like you're having this experience, because in a sense you are having this experience. They'll put you in a plane and fly you over the Alps, and suddenly you're over a deep canyon and your stomach just falls. Or they'll put you on a stunt plane and you feel every roll. It's not unusual for people to lose their lunch on the floor of those places, because it is a real experience. Motion sickness gets the best of it. This is the best way I know to think of how this must have been for the Apostle John. He's not just hearing words. He's seeing moving things in living color as a part of the action. We've already seen him in chapter 5 weep over what he saw. He was involved in this. As I said last Monday, he didn't read the book, he saw the movie. And if you're one who says that the book is always better than the movie, and I think that's probably generally true, you're probably right in this instance as well. The book may have had names and dates and details that are here only signified or symbolized. In the 16th chapter of the book of John, the 13th verse, the Lord says, "When He, the Spirit of truth, is come, He will guide you into all truth." And to the apostles He said, "He will show you things to come." The seal, trumpet, and bowl prophecies present 3 distinct periods of divine judgment occurring sequentially. The number 7, signifying completion, calls attention to the structural symmetry of these 3 series, the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls, and shows their central role in depicting the sequential aspects of the events being forecast. He was in the Spirit. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? This little statement from William Blake's Tiger always reminds me of the Apocalypse. The message of the seals is introductory to the remainder of the book. The message of the horseman is introductory to the seals. So at this point, I'd like to read chapter 1, from verse 1 of chapter 6. Just read the first 8 verses here. As I said last week, we're not going to be able to read most of this, but just to begin here, I would like to read 8 verses from chapter 6. "And I saw when the Lamb had opened one of the seals, and I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder, and one of the 4 beasts saying, Come and see. And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. And when he had opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, Come and see. And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, that they should kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword. And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, Come and see. And I beheld, and lo, a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts saying, A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. And see thou hurt not the oil and the wine. And when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, Come and see. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth to kill with the sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. These 4 seals seem to be a unit. 4 horses, 4 living creatures, and the King James called beasts, but they're really living creatures. 4, 2, 1 in each one of these series. We expect to find the fulfillment of this right after John's vision, because the time was at hand for this to begin being fulfilled. We're focusing on the 4th empire, the unnamed diverse beast of Daniel chapter 7, which turned out to be the Roman Empire. The persecution under Domitian probably put the church in a state of expectancy. Even pre-Christian Judaism had identified Daniel's 4th beast with Rome, and the little horn with a Roman persecutor. They must have wondered, in the 1st century in 96 AD, when they're receiving this, they must have wondered if the stage was now set for the little horn persecutor. The dream vision apocalypses of Daniel chapter 2 and 4 and 7 and 8 and 10 through 12, as well as many pseudepigrapha, prepared the original readers to expect the fulfillment of the vision to begin in the future, near to the time of the author, or with regard to the pseudepigrapha, right near the time of the alleged author, because they used names that weren't really the names of the author in order to give the book a wider circulation and a greater sense of authority. The Jewish and Christian communities of the 1st century expected a deterioration of the empire comparable to that portrayed in these symbols. They would have looked to the near future and to Rome for the fulfillment of this. Just as the animals in Daniel chapter 7 and chapter 8 are each associated with a specific national power, the horse would have been understood in the same manner here in Revelation 6. Revelation draws on the Old Testament for most of its symbols. The horsemen here appear in the manner similar to the prophecies in Zechariah chapter 1, verses 7 through 11, and chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. Ideally, we would take the time to go back to all these Old Testament references, but this is just a survey, so we note them in passing. These horses bear in their colors messages such as peace and war. The horse is the symbol for the course of empire, and as an imperial symbol in the 1st century, it's associated with Rome. The Romans held the horse to be sacred to Mars, who was their god of war. The horse was annually sacrificed to Mars in the city of Rome. Images of the horse appear on the back of Roman coins commemorating the god Mars. The Roman war horse is found abundantly as a national emblem on Roman coins. And I thought about putting some of those coins up here, but I didn't know how to do it, and even if I did, you know how to do it on your phones right where you are, and I need to streamline rather than adding more material to what we're trying to do. So, and once you start putting up coins and medals, where do you really stop with that? So I don't have them on here, but you have them freely accessible to you. They're not hidden anywhere. The periods that are indicated by the horsemen are not strictly contiguous eras. One period does not necessarily end when the next period begins. But we're seeing a gradual deterioration that's progressive here in the Roman Empire. There is in the history predicted by seals 2 through 4 a cumulative effect leading to the eventual dissolution of the pagan empire with the 6th seal. The color of the horses, white, red, black, and pale, or livid, represents in succession the symptoms which the Roman body politic would show and visibly display. The riders represent not individuals, but a collective body or class or series of individuals of the kind that's presented. The 1st century reader would probably have assumed that the 4 horsemen portray the downfall of the pagan empire of their time. But the 1st century reader could not have known that these concise statements actually pertain to hundreds of years passing by. They trusted that God worketh all things according to the counsel of His own will, Ephesians 1:11, and that ultimately He will bring many sons to glory, Hebrews 2:10. God permits evil as punitive judgment on the ungodly and as loving discipline on His children. The horsemen provide an introduction that leads up to the 5th seal, where a suffering church comes into focus. During the period of the seals, the church grew immensely, but it became increasingly decadent, both by the influx of nominal Christians and by the introduction of erroneous doctrines. The endless refinements of heresy proved to be a more constant and a more insidious enemy than persecution itself. But more about that later. The horse represents the course of empire through war, generally through war, because of its use in war. The horse was not a beast of burden in those days. Donkeys and oxen were the plow pullers of that time. And there are lots of Old Testament references that can be cited about horses in war. Proverbs 21:31, the horse is prepared against the day of battle. Jeremiah 8:6, the horse rusheth into battle. In Deuteronomy 17:16, the multiplicity of horses was forbidden to the kings of God's people because they would encourage imperialistic warfare. The horse refers to the course of empire often involving war, or that which is in some way connected with war. In chapter 19, Jesus rides a white horse in verses 11 through 13. But in that instance, Jesus has a different crown, he has a different weapon, and he's fighting a spiritual warfare, so I do not take the rider on the white horse here in chapter 6 to be Jesus. The horse in each of the first four seal prophecies must have the same general meaning. I don't see how we can have the rider on the white horse represent the triumphant church, while the other three in seals 2 through 4 represent the Roman power. These four are a unit. The first horseman is clearly parallel with the other three. The rider is going to represent the series of emperors or the authority of the imperial throne. The emperor, as depicted here in symbol, often literally rode a white horse, as Roman generals did in their triumph. The bow represents militarism. And we could nail this down from Jeremiah and Hosea, but you can look those up yourself if you're interested. He went forth conquering and to conquer. At the time of the book of Revelation being written, the bow was usually associated with either of two nations, the Parthians, who ruled in the east beyond the bounds of the Roman Empire, or the Cretans, who were right within the Roman Empire and were famous as archers and were extensively employed by Rome as mercenaries in Roman armies. In fact, this has been going on a long time. It appears that Cretan mercenaries are represented by the Kerethites in the personal bodyguard of King David, back in chapter 30 of 1 Samuel, and chapter 8 of 2 Samuel, chapter 15 of 2 Samuel. The Targumist who paraphrased and expanded the original in the Old Testament, translated the Hebrew with the word archers there instead of Kerethites. The Kerethites are commonly identified with Cretans. The Cretans were famous in antiquity both as archers and as makers of bows. The Cretan Apollo in legend was the inventor of the bow and the teacher of the Cretans in archery. Eliot gives an instance of a bow inscribed on an ancient tombstone, and the epigram says that the bow indicates that the deceased was a Cretan. Just as today, if you see a Star of David on a tombstone, you know that the person buried there is a Jew. Back in the first century, if you saw a bow on a tombstone, that meant the person that was buried there was a Cretan. And this was commonly done. You'd have a magpie on the tombstone if the person buried there was talkative, or a cup if the person was a drunkard, or a pile of wool if the person was known for her domestic diligence. A bow referred to a Cretan. This was commonly understood in John's time. The bow was a Cretan weapon, and the bow was a Cretan badge. If the rider on the white horse represents the Roman power, then the Cretan meaning of the bow is the appropriate association, rather than the Parthian meaning. The bow may be taken to suggest that the emperor was Cretan or otherwise associated with Crete. So let's get on to the first seal here. We see a white horse. The word white is very important in the book of Revelation. It appears about 14 times or so. When I was a boy, a lot of people on the college campuses where I was going to school would carry around Chairman Mao's little red book, and it was known as that, the Little Red Book. In Missouri, we have what's known as the Missouri Blue Book, which contains a lot of information about the government in our state. But somebody has called the book of Revelation God's little white book, because white is always a symbol of purity or victory or both in the book of Revelation and in the New Testament, and the Bible generally. White is that kind of a symbol. Triumph, victory, prosperity. The bow, as we've said, refers to Cretan things. In verse 2, we see a crown here. Now in chapter 19, Jesus wears a diadem. But the crown here is a Stephanos, which is a laurel wreath. A big difference here, bigger than we might at first assume. The laurel wreath was awarded to athletes and was worn by emperors celebrating victory in battle. It's found on many a Roman medal, many a Roman coin or sculpture of those times, indicating a conquering hero. They would have the arches built and their triumphs celebrated with being pulled by white horses and riding white horses. We have a coin showing Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, receiving a laurel crown at such a victory celebration. We have a representation of the Emperor Commodus with a laurel crown. So there's plenty of documentary evidence about this. The distinction between the laurel crown and the diadem is carefully observed in the vision of Revelation. From the accession of Domitian, from the accession of Domitian in 81 AD, it was appointed to the reigning emperor as his own proper distinction. This laurel crown is a very important thing here. Not until the time of Diocletian, 292 AD, was the diadem adopted by Roman emperors. So it would be an anachronism to represent a Roman emperor in the first 2.5 centuries of the Christian era as wearing a diadem. We have a Cretan coin showing the god Mars on the front, and on the back, the sacred horse. The white horse and rider point to a period of victory, prosperity, and peace in the Roman Empire, a time of triumphant militarism. And the prophecy of the white horse and rider was fulfilled from the year 96 AD, when the Apostle John wrote this, to about 183 AD. Domitian was a cruel tyrant and eventually was assassinated by his own soldiers when they just felt like they couldn't put up with it anymore. And the story goes that after Domitian had been killed, his soldiers were looking for somebody weak that they could put on the throne and then sort of control things through him. As he'd be the emperor, but they would control things through him and he wouldn't have much to say about anything. And the story goes that they're in the palace after they had killed Domitian, that they saw the curtains shaking over by the edge, so that there were a couple feet sticking out, and they pulled it back, and there was Nerwa. So they looked at each other and nodded their heads and said, yeah, let's make this guy the emperor, put him on the throne. And we see here in this verse that a Stephanos was given unto him. This is a new line of emperors under whom the symbolic color of the Roman horse would be white. Nerwa reigned from 96 to 98 AD. He was from a family on the Isle of Crete. These people were the ones who had perfected the use of the bow in war, and there's only one emperor in the long history of Rome that was born in Crete, and that was Nerwa. Nerwa, the first emperor in the succession after the writing of Revelation, called attention to his Cretan origin on his coinage. Prior to this time, each emperor had come from either Roman or at least Italian families, but after Domitian, this no longer held true. Nerwa had had a distinguished career as a Roman senator. He had enacted several laws that were designed to eliminate abuse and injustice, including injustice toward the Jews. Nerwa ruled only 16 months, but he began a new line of Caesars. We've had the Julio-Claudians already, and we've seen the Flavians come and go. After Vespasian and his sons Titus and Domitian, we have Nerwa the Cretian. Hebrew Christians benefited from Nerwa's reforms. Nerwa is the one who freed John from exile on the Isle of Patmos and let him come back to Ephesus at a very advanced age, where, according to tradition, he was carried into the assemblies of the saints because he could no longer walk on his own. Carried into the assemblies of the saints, saying, "Little children, love one another. Little children, love one another." There is in the British Museum a silver Roman coin of the Emperor Nerwa showing him wearing the laurel wreath crown. And on its back, it has the huntress goddess Diana with her quiver and her bow. She was an object of special worship by the inhabitants of Crete. After Nerwa, we have Trajan from 98 to 117. Trajan was known in his day as the new Alexander because he was such a conqueror. He went forth conquering and to conquer. Many maps of the Roman Empire show it as it was at 117 AD, which was the last year of Trajan's reign. This is when it had reached the fullest extent that it was ever going to reach. Trajan's column at Rome is the memorial of these victories. After him we have Hadrian from 117 to 138. Hadrian was a tremendous builder. And then Antoninus Pius from 138 to 161. He had 2 sons, but they died before he became emperor. So these 4, Nerwa, Trajan, Hadrian, and Antoninus Pius, had no sons to succeed them on the throne. This is very important. This meant that each one of them was free to pick the ablest and the fittest man that he knew for so high an office. Benevolent monarchy is the most effective form of government, as long as you have a good king, a philosopher king, as Plato put it. The trouble is, the good king always dies, and then you're stuck with his ne'er-do-well son, whom his father probably neglected because he spent so much time being a good king. The principle of heredity disappeared from Roman monarchy for nearly a century here, and was replaced by the principle of adoption. These men could adopt without slighting their offspring. Marcus Aurelius is the one who came next from 161 to 180. Victory after victory attended the Roman standards under Marcus Aurelius until the German barbarians were driven into their forest and were reduced to submission. The column of Marcus Aurelius at Rome marks the victories at the close of the period of the First Seal. In this era, and in this era only, each emperor was chosen and legally adopted by his predecessor, with the result that each was legally and each was officially Cretan. The Roman historian Renan called these 5 emperors the finest succession of great sovereigns the world has ever had. They are known historically as the 5 good emperors. That's from the particular edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica that I bought before I knew we would have Wikipedia someday. These are known as the philosopher kings. This era is known historically as the Age of the Antonines. Medals are still in existence of the 5 emperors belonging to this era, representing them as depicted here. We have come to the place now that I need to take just a moment to mention an 18th century Englishman. His name is Edward Gibbon. He has left us 8 attempts at autobiography. There's a picture of Gibbon, such as it is. You see him just a little bit there. He wrote 7 or 8 autobiographies that are together in this one book, and they give us some insight into the man so that we know just a little bit about him. He was born into a family that was independently wealthy, so that throughout his life he never had to work for a living. As a boy of 12, he was small and slightly built and sickly. He occupied his times of convalescence with reading, mainly with the reading of history. When he was 15, he was sent to Oxford University, but he was too sickly to engage in sports. He was too shy to mingle with the other students. He hated exercise and loved food. The faculty at Oxford was not very good in those days, and though Edward had been born into a Protestant family in Protestant England, he was combative and reactionary, and he studied himself into the Roman Catholic Church, which, according to Blackstone at that time, was high treason in England. So he was banished to Switzerland. He met Voltaire there. He drank deeply at the fountains of infidelity in France and accepted the Enlightenment and became a skeptic and an agnostic. He visited Italy, and when he came to Rome, letting him tell the story here from one of his autobiographies, he said, quote, "It was at Rome on the 15th of October, 1764, as I sat musing amidst the ruins of the Capitol while the barefooted friars were singing vespers in the Temple of Jupiter, that the idea of writing the decline and fall of the city first started to my mind. After Rome has kindled and satisfied the enthusiasm of the classic pilgrim, his curiosity for all meaner objects insensibly subsides." So he decided to write the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. He spent many years in preparation for this. The death of his father left him an ample fortune. He undertook his writing with untiring industry and published his first volume on February the 17th, 1776, the year of our Declaration of Independence. He wrote his last volume in May of 1788. Gibbon saw no design in history. To him, events are the outcome of unguided causes. But his decline and fall of the Roman Empire, it looks like that. In the modern library edition, it comes in 3 volumes. That's volume 3, the only one of mine that still has a dust jacket on it that I can show you. This was the outstanding book of the 18th century. Personally, I believe that Gibbon may have been providentially guided by God to give us the raw material for understanding much of the book of Revelation. He unwittingly explains the historical fulfillment of great portions of the book. If he'd known he was doing that, he probably wouldn't have written a line, because he wouldn't have wanted to verify the Bible. But that makes his work all the more valuable for us. It wasn't written by somebody who was trying to make it fit with the book of Revelation. It was written by somebody who didn't even believe the Bible. There are two kinds of servants of God. There are voluntary servants of God like yourselves who serve God on purpose, and there are involuntary servants of God who, acting on the basis of their own free will, do things profitable for the cause of God without meaning to. Like the Assyrians in Isaiah chapter 10, verse 5. They didn't know they were serving God, but God was using them as a willow switch to discipline His people. Or like King Cyrus, God used him, even predicted him by name ahead of time. Perhaps Edward Gibbon was an involuntary servant of God. However that may be, I want to read to you from Gibbon's book about the era of Roman history of which we're speaking. This is the Modern Library Edition, Volume 1, page 70. And I'm not going to be doing very much of this, so don't worry. We just don't have time for it. But I wanted you to hear from his hand what he says about this era of time. And he wrote this in 1777. This was published first in 1776, so the American experiment that you and I are still a part of doesn't come into play here when he's making his comparison. But here's what Gibbon said. I think I should put that up there where that's found in case you want it. If a man were called to fix the period in the history of the world during which the condition of the human race was most happy and prosperous, he would, without hesitation, name that which elapsed from the death of Domitian to the accession of Commodus. Commodus was the son of Marcus Aurelius, who took them out of this era, but it took him a while to get that done. Anyway, he's talking about the same era of time that we're talking about, the age of the Antonines, Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, and the Antonines. The Revelation chapter 6, verse 2, the first seal, is talking about that very thing. Back on page 6 of this same book, he talks about Trajan here. Trajan was ambitious of fame. As long as mankind shall continue to bestow more liberal applause on their destroyers than on their benefactors, the thirst for military glory will ever be the vice of the most exalted characters. And he goes on and talks about how Trajan went forth conquering and to conquer. He says, every day the astonished Senate received new intelligence of new names and new nations that acknowledged his sway. They were informed that the kings, and they list a long list of them, had accepted their diadems from the hands of the emperor. And talks about how Trajan fulfilled his portion of this. So there are a lot of things that you could read from this that would nail this down even more, but I think you get the idea there. This is the time that the Roman Empire achieved the greatest extent geographically that it was ever going to achieve. When I took a Roman history course at KU one time, I was required to purchase a history of Rome to 565 by Arthur Boak. Boak says this of this period of time. The long period between the death of Domitian in 96 AD and that of Alexander Severus in 235 AD falls naturally into two parts. The first of these closes with the death of Marcus Aurelius in 180. And he further states that during this period, the Roman Empire reached its maximum in territorial extent, in population, and in material prosperity. This was due to the happy combination of internal peace and good government, which produced for the Mediterranean area as a whole a degree of security and well-being otherwise unexampled in its history for so long a time. It has caused this epoch to be looked upon as the golden age of Roman imperialism. This first seal is about this period of the greatest victory and prosperity ever known to the Roman Empire, maintained by strong emperors and military control of the Roman borders. The Roman wars during this period were all but uniformly triumphant. They hardly ever lost. Outstanding examples of this were Trajan's celebrated conquest and additions to the Roman provinces, his victory over Bar Kokhba and his Jewish Messianists, the defeat of the barbarian invasions of these eras, and the Parthian War. And we're not going to spend this much time on the other seals, but it's important to get the first one right and to understand why we're getting it right. If we start in the wrong place, then we've gotten a building block wrong, and it may affect our ability to understand what follows. Second seal, verses 3 and 4, shows us a red horse, red bringing blood to our minds. And the earth here is the Roman Empire, as it so often is in the Bible, in the New Testament. The earth, Ecumenike, refers to the area that was occupied by Rome. This was a time when they were, in the Roman Empire, they were going to kill one another, according to the text. Now, we've fought a lot of wars in our history in America, but we've only fought one war where we killed one another. And that, of course, was the Civil War, 1861 to 1865. The Civil War in the Roman Empire lasted almost a century. from 192 to 284. Ending in 284 at the accession of Diocletian. Again, the expression was given here, and this emphasizes the providence of God, which controls, to some extent, controls the forces of history. Commodus, the son of Marcus Aurelius, succeeded his father as sole emperor upon the death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 AD. Both describes Commodus as the ignoble son of a noble father. At first, for the first 3 years, Commodus governed reasonably well, but after that, there was an attempt on his life. As he entered the theater one day, a man tried to kill him, but he made the mistake of starting too soon. Commodus is over here, and this would-be assassin raises his dagger high and says, "Commodus, the Senate sends you this." And Commodus is way over here, so before the man could get to him, obviously the bodyguards have dispatched the man and gotten rid of him forever. But Commodus was noticeably changed by this experience. He became even more paranoid than he had been before. It grew worse and worse. And when he himself was finally assassinated on the last day of 192 AD, this ushered in an era of civil strife that was just incredible. I don't know of a civil war ever, anywhere, that was like this one. Peace was taken from the earth for nearly 100 years. Sismondi, in his Fall of the Roman Empire, Volume 1, page 86, says, "With Commodus commenced the third and most calamitous period. It lasted 92 years, from 192 to 284. During that period, 32 emperors and 27 pretenders alternately hurled each other from the throne in incessant civil warfare. 92 years of almost incessant civil warfare taught the world on what a frail foundation the virtue of the Antonines had placed the felicity of the empire." Gibbon, talking about the same period of time, describes 34 emperors and 19 pretenders. You get the sense that things were so chaotic that from the sources that we have, it's difficult to tell exactly what was happening all the time. But he mentions 34 emperors and 19 pretenders or tyrants during this period, all but 2 of whom died violent deaths. A great sword was given. The sword representing the standing army, the men of the sword. They were having quarrels among themselves. The word sword, I put the original word for sword there, macharos. This is the common weapon of the Roman military at the time of the writing. This is the short sword, in distinction from the long broadsword, which is a different word that protrudes from the mouth of Jesus in chapters 1 and 2 and 19. Both words mean simply a sword, but in the first century reader would have found natural the association of this particular sword with the Roman military. Now, our Civil War was fought over principles like states' rights and slavery. The English Civil War was fought over the rights of kings. But the Civil War in the Roman Empire was not fought over principles. It was fought solely over the ambitions of military men, not over any principle of truth or right. It was the era of the sword, as competing rivals from the military ruled by the sword in one murderous coup after another. The adjective great in front of sword is unusual as pertaining to the short sword and suggests the measure of power that was given with this weapon. Undue authority given to it. Unnatural use made of it. In our country, we have a civilian commander-in-chief as a check and a control on the dangerous power of the military. But Commodus, in his paranoia, exalted the commander of the Praetorian Guard, and the Praetorian Guard were the bodyguards of the emperors. And he exalted him and gave him absolutely despotic authority. The Praetorian commander, after Commodus gave him this, after he was given this sword, he represented the emperor, and he could legally kill anybody he wanted to in the city of Rome with absolute impunity. So the supremacy was now with the military, and there was no check upon them whatsoever. In 193, well, this is as good a place to stop as any. Please take a 10-minute break and come back at 11 o'clock.